First of all, my name is Emmanuel Adegboye. I'm the head of Madica. Madica is a sector-agnostic pre-seed investment program for underrepresented and underfunded founders in Africa. And I'll share a bit more about the structure. I'll share a bit more about the whys, and let me just jump straight into it. So I guess before we go into what Madica is, I think it's always very helpful to just kind of understand why this program in the first place, right? Everyone agrees that there's a lot of funding coming in. Sorry about that. My internet got disconnected. I hope you guys can still hear me. So I started out saying that a lot of the funding in Africa literally goes into 4 cities for the most part, right? A lot of the funding also goes to startups that are funded by, or that are founded by male CEOs, right? Most of the funding also goes into fintech. And quite frankly, a lot of the funding also goes to founders who schooled abroad, who already have the networks to be able to raise funding. They sound like they have shared experience with a lot of the folks who fund globally. And what we've seen is, even though there's a lot of funding coming into Africa today, it really just goes to a small group of people who are either in Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town, Cairo, who are likely male, who are likely building fintech startups, and who likely schooled abroad, right? And we think that that needs to change. And we think that the diversity of funding in Africa needs to change for various reasons. One is the fact that there are challenges and opportunities across all of Africa. And I mean, the number of founders on this call and the diversity of places that you all are joining from today is testament to the fact that there is work that needs to be done across the continent, across different sectors, right? And we think that by diversifying the kind of funding that's coming into the continent, into all of these different spaces, we would be able to see a lot more problems solved. I think the other piece is that in reality, a lot of the funding that's coming into Africa today, it's really still just a small portion of global VC funding globally, right? And we think that the way to grow the, I guess, percentage of funding that's coming into Africa is by unlocking funding that's going into all of these other sectors, right? And that's really why this program was set up. Now, in reality, the truth is a lot of the challenge, and I'll talk about what Madica is in a second, but a lot of where the opportunity lies in our view is at that pre-seed stage, right? We see very many startups go through accelerator programs or go through early stage entrepreneur support organizations, but only a few are able to make it to the point where they are able to raise global capital, right? We think that the biggest challenge is at that pre-seed stage, where startups then need significant funding to be able to cross that gap, but not just funding, they also need the kinds of support that's able to help them like grow through that phase. And that's what Madica aims to provide. So the, broadly speaking, 5 things that this program provides, it's 1, capital. We provide up to $200,000 to the founders that we support in investment capital. And just to quickly answer a question that's recurring that we've seen is, we do intend to use safes as the means or the vehicle. So that kind of simplifies the negotiations at this stage. And it would obviously still be on a case-by-case basis for each founder. But yeah, that's how we intend to make those investments. We also intend to provide community, so access to mentors, and I'll talk a bit more. There are a lot of questions about how mentorship will run. I'll answer those in a second, but we do intend to provide access to mentors, and we are trying to do things a bit differently with mentorship. Maybe just to quickly answer that question, in the sense that we want our mentors to be able to provide hands-on support to the founders that we support. And we've been very deliberate in finding mentors who have the experience of helping to grow companies to a significant stage, and who can then bring back this experience to the founders that we bring on into this program. But we're also working to incentivize mentors in a way that they can provide significant amount of time, provide and more like hand-holding support to the founders that we bring onto this program. We also intend to connect founders to experts, coaches, but a big part of this is also the peer networks that they would build through this program. And Madica is also part of the Omidyar group, and I'll talk a bit more about what that relationship looks like. And Flourish, because this program was launched by Flourish, we also have access to Flourish's community of founders, Flourish's community of resources that we might be able to leverage. On the curriculum side, we intend to work with founders over a 12 to 18 months period, providing them personalized company building support. This includes workshops. So a big part of this is looking at all of the different areas that startups need to grow as they think about building their companies. And we have plans to deliver workshops with experts who can then be able to coach and guide them on these different areas. But a big part of the curriculum is also bringing, a lot of these workshops will be virtual, I should say, but a big part of this is also bringing together the cohort at every point in time, in person for week-long activities, which would include workshops, which include in-person mentorship, but also helping them to build networks with investors. And yeah, so a big part of this is that ecosystem immersion trips, which we're hoping will happen at least twice a year. We've also curated and we're continuing to grow our pool of tools, credits, and discounts that founders will be able to access. And then lastly, we do intend to then make introductions to investors who would be able to invest in their follow-on rounds, but they'll always still be a big part of Madica's community. I'll answer very specific questions that have been sent earlier, but this is kind of an overview of what the program looks like. Also, to talk about what we look for in founders. So we prioritize founders, local founders with diverse teams from across the continent. So we're investing across the entire continent. We have a preference for founders who are truly local and founders who have like diverse founding teams, which means ideally you have a female CEO, but at least you have women on your founding team and they have significant equity in the companies. So they are either holding a C-level position, hold significant equity, or playing significant roles as a part of the founding team. We also prioritize ventures with at least a minimum viable product, and ideally with first few paying customers. For us, the reason why paying customers is important at this stage is not necessarily focusing on the tech per se, but on the discipline, on focusing on what people are actually willing to pay for, right? And it just kind of helps when like you're prioritizing what people really need to pay for and that you're solving a need that people have and that they're willing to pay for. And that's kind of why this is an important piece for us. We also prioritize ventures that haven't yet raised significant institutional capital because, I mean, as I mentioned earlier about our whys, we are prioritizing founders who have significant or strong fundamentals, are building solid businesses, but for some reason, maybe because of their location, maybe because of their gender, maybe because of their not schooling abroad and haven't yet built these networks, they haven't been able to raise significant institutional capital, and those are the ventures that we want to prioritize. Also, this program is sector agnostic, and so it means we're investing across all sectors, but they have to be building, you have to be building real scalable solutions. So to clarify, we are a VC firm in the sense that we invest like every typical VC would, right? But what differentiates us from every other VC firm is that we are then able to provide all of these additional programmatic support. So we kind of take the best parts of VC and the best parts of entrepreneur support organization. So we're not necessarily an accelerator program, an incubator program, but we take the best parts of all of these different programs and merge that with the best parts of VC. So we would evaluate our investments like every VC would. So you have to be building real scalable solutions, and that's what we're looking for. I hope this provides a quick overview. This slide is really just to give a bit of context into like Flourish and the Omidyar network. So many of us on this call may be familiar with the Omidyar network, and the Omidyar network has been investing in Africa since 2005, and some of the investments that have been made are on the slide here. But Flourish was born out of the Omidyar network's financial inclusion investment. So a lot of those legacy investments in financial inclusion have now been warehoused on Flourish. And Flourish's core mandate is to invest as a VC firm in solutions that help people's financial health. And they've been doing that since Flourish was officially launched, I think in 2019. But a lot of the investments since 2010 are still part of the portfolio till date, right? Madica was then launched a couple of weeks ago as Flourish's response to a lot of the challenges that I'm sure, as you all know, exist within the ecosystem, that gap in the pre-seed stage for underrepresented founders. But the reason why I shared this slide is there's a lot of history and there's a lot of experience in investing in Africa, and a lot of that experience we're bringing into this program to truly help founders succeed. I would stop sharing my screen at this point and just go into questions that people have sent. But just as a reminder, the link to apply to this program is www.madica.vc/apply. One of the things that I would love to emphasize at this point is we run a very open application process, right? So you don't need a referral, you don't need an introduction to the team to be able to apply. Everyone can apply directly on the website. And we've also decided very specifically to make this a rolling application. So there isn't a deadline per se to apply. We're constantly reviewing applications, and we're going to be bringing in startups into this program on a rolling basis. So apply when you feel most ready to join this program, and the application will always be open. I would stop sharing my screen now and go into questions that have been sent prior, but I see a number of questions in the Q&A tab already. Oh, it says the chat is currently disabled. Give me a second. Let me see if I can. One second. Okay, I believe I've just enabled the chat. So if you guys want to just share where you're from, introduce yourself, I'm going to go ahead and start taking questions now. I see a number of questions in the Q&A tab already. If you have very specific questions, I would recommend using the Q&A tab so that we can keep track of those. We won't be taking questions from the chat box, so use the Q&A for that. But feel free to use the chat for just to introduce yourself. So I've tried to group a lot of the questions that we've gotten into different batches. There are questions on ticket size and investments in general. There are questions about what counts as like MVP. There are questions on how we evaluate investments. There are questions on what sectors we look at. There are questions on what's the relationship between Omidyar and Madica, and how involved we'll be on a day-to-day basis, and things like that. And there are some other general questions. So I'm going to try to run through as many of these questions as I can in the time that we have. But please feel free to pop in more questions that you might have. So the first question here, and there are a number of similar questions. The ticket size, we're able to invest up to $200,000 in the founders that we support. Might be less, but we generally, that's generally our max investment that we're able to do. But one thing that I want to emphasize is a question that I've also gotten in the past, which is, do we count the programmatic support that we provide as part of the investment? And the answer to that is no. So we invest up to $200K cash, right? All of the additional support that we provide through this program is on top of the investments that we make, right? I just want to clarify that. I also want to clarify that our investments are very commercial. So we would evaluate every deal very commercially, right? But the additional programmatic support that we're able to provide is our way of making up for some of the challenges that we know startup founders experience, or some of the resources that we understand might be missing in some of the ecosystems that we operate in, that they operate in. And for us, we think that that's then our way of truly helping them succeed on top of the investments that we make. So the investments are very commercial, right? But these additional supports we're able to provide essentially like free of charge. How much equity does Madica get from the startups? Is it a standard deal or it varies? I mentioned earlier that we do intend to use safes. So it would vary by startup, but we do intend to also be very founder friendly in how we approach every investment that we make. Do you have permissible and non-permissible use of funds from the investment by Madica? Are there specific industries you prioritize for investments? This is sector agnostic. So we don't have any specific industries that we're prioritizing. We do want to see frontier sectors, right? But we're not necessarily prioritizing any industry over another. Do we have permissible and non-permissible use of funds from investments? I mean, as part of the investment process, we would want to understand what the use of funds are. I mean, it typically needs to be towards like some growth objective or helping you scale to the next stage of growth. And we would want to see that your funding going into helping you scale in that direction. So I hope that answers your question. When investing, what type of return are you looking for? So I mean, like I mentioned, we invest like every VC would. So we would expect the startups that we support to be venture backable from that standpoint. But I think beyond the commercial returns, I think for us, what's also really important to us is the demonstration effect that comes from helping 25 to 30 startups succeed over the next couple of years. Our hope is that if the founders, which is why these investments need to be very commercial, by the way, if the founders succeed, for us, success in some ways means helping, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. I might have to pause the chat for a second so that we can all just focus on on these conversations for now. Yes, so I was saying that for us, return also means seeing these underrepresented founders succeed. So for us, broadly speaking, success means helping or supporting these founders succeed in raising follow-on capital, building solid foundations for their business in such a way that other global investors start to then rethink how they invest across all of these different spaces in Africa, right? We think that there is a perception of risk when people think about investing outside of these core orbs and core markets that I mentioned earlier, right? And for us, we hope to change this perception by helping these founders truly succeed. And for us, what that means is, or what success looks like, is then potentially investors that wouldn't have invested in these startups 18 months prior are suddenly like, hey, where have you been? Like, and these startups then suddenly look like really interesting to them. So helping them get to that point is what this program is about. And yeah, I say that in answering the question of what type of return are we looking for? So we're looking for founders that we can truly help succeed. We're looking for founders who are able to scale their businesses to the point where other investors are able to then like take this forward with. Do you have any advice on how we can prepare for due diligence? Maybe in answering this question, I would just share a bit more about what the application process looks like today, right? So founders go to www.madica.vc/apply to apply. It's a quick form that can be filled in less than 10 minutes. We do a first screen. We aim to do that in less than a week. We're currently dealing with a lot of backlog, so that's taking much longer than that. But our aim is to, going forward, do that in less than a week. Folks who pass that first screen get invited to the second stage, which essentially is a much longer application form. We then ask a lot of questions about the business, about the team, about the space, about the solution that you're building, and things like that. So have a better sense of the opportunity, the founding team, and things like that. And folks who pass this stage are the ones who would then take a first call with, right? And then the rest of our due diligence process in terms of like going into your data room, if you have one, speaking with some of your potential customers, speaking with some of your partners, and things like that. And the rest of the due diligence process goes on from there. We aim to be able to complete this process in about 6 weeks. But like I said, we're still dealing with a bit of backlog now. So that's taking much longer, but that's kind of what our process looks like. So in terms of preparing for due diligence, I think it's providing the information you have as honestly as possible, because we would ask these questions. We would want to understand this in a lot more detail. So please do not lie, but please provide as much information as possible as would help us make an informed decision. There are a few more questions, and there are a lot of questions in the chat. I hope we'll be able to get through all of them, but I hope these, in answering the questions that I'm already answering, I hope it's answering some of the questions that have been put in the chat as well. And these questions were sent prior, so I'm sure a lot of you put these questions in earlier. Will you join boards of invested company? I don't think that we have any. I think this will be on a case-by-case basis. And it's really early in the journey for us to be prioritizing taking board seats. So I would say it's not really a priority for us, but probably something that we would evaluate on a case-by-case basis. What type of ventures are you looking to invest in? What's the selling point for startups to be able to successfully raise with you? I already answered this question. What's the stage of investment? We say it's pre-seed, but it's also a bit of semantics. I think the important thing to keep in mind is we're looking for founders who $200,000 would would form a significant part of their current raise, or they need to survive, as it were, over the next 12 to 18 months. We are definitely prioritizing founders who won't be raising while in the program, because part of this program is supporting them in their next raise. So if, for instance, all you're raising is 100K and you show us a way that this is all you need for the next 12 to 18 months, then that's interesting. If you're raising, say, $400,000, for instance, we can make a commitment to invest if this is interesting, but we also want to see how you plan to raise the rest. So I say that just to say that, like, we use precede as the term, but we're a bit flexible as long as you're not raising significantly more than we're offering, or significantly less as well. But we kind of think that 200K is the sweet spot. What is the deal size you're looking to invest in? I'm not sure how to answer that question, but if you're asking, we intend to invest in 25 to 30 startups over the next 3 years. What instruments are you keen on? Saves already mentioned that. Are you supporting pre-seed investment phase for tech startups that already finalize a prototype and looking to deploy live testing? So we do want startups that have an MVP already and ideally have paying customers. It would be very rare for us to invest in just an idea. And I'm saying this to also answer the next question, which is, what's your minimal development stage of a startup you render support? I think it would be very rare for us to invest in just an idea. At the very least, you should have a proof of concept of sorts. And that's what we're looking for. What kind of MVP is Madica looking for? And do you consider offline sales as traction where the technology is at piloting stage? I think it's a really good question. We know that you're still going to figure out your tech over time, and we would love to work with you over time in doing that. So yes, if you're able to show how, and as a matter of fact, I think being able to do things that don't scale, so to speak, which is your point about offline, I imagine, is, I think makes sense. So if you're able to show how you're solving this need for your target market in a way that they are willing to pay for it, even if your tech isn't yet fully figured out, that counts as an MVP, right? So I hope that answers that question. What type of startup is Madica looking to fund? E-commerce, fintech, food tech, climate tech? We're sector agnostic, so we're investing across all of these different spaces. What is Madica's view on investing in faith-related businesses with a global fintech play? Again, we're very sector agnostic, and we, as long as this is a scalable business, as long as it's solving a real problem, we would look at it. From a commercial standpoint. From a thesis standpoint, I already shared what we're also trying to do from an underrepresentation standpoint. With the equity exchange for equity, is there a set percentage Madica would require? Is this negotiable? Negotiable, we're doing saves. Maximum investment Madica can make, and are there follow-on investments? We are able to invest up to 200K, might be slightly more, might be slightly less, depending on what the founders need, but that's kind of a maximum. And their follow-on investments, we do not plan to do any follow-on investments. And I also like to clarify that we didn't design this program as a pipeline into Flourish, Flourish's core fund. They're separate entities, separate vehicles. I mean, if we do find startups that are interesting for Flourish, we would definitely pass them on at some point. Just the same way we would introduce founders to other investors who might then be able to invest in their follow-on round. So as a fund or as a program, as an investment program, we're not set up to do follow-on investing. Our core goal is to help founders bridge that gap between very early stage and being able to raise subsequent funding from other investors. So, and that's what we're set up to do. What's your process for evaluating investments? I already shared that earlier. When will the program start and when will I get feedback on my application? Good question. we're aiming to make our first investment early in Q1 of next year. And I mean, some founders are already in that pipeline now. Like I said, we aim to get back to founders as quickly as possible. That's taking a bit longer now just because of the backlog that we have to deal with. But some founders have already gotten feedback on stage 1 applications. We're reviewing some stage 2 applications now, and they'll get feedback on those soon as well. So my answer would be, we aim to conclude this process in 6, maximum 8 weeks. But because of the backlog that we're working with right now, that's taking slightly longer, but I hope that answers your question. How long does it take to make a decision and invest? I already answered that as well. What's the relationship between the Omidyar network and Madica, and in what strategic ways does Madica's work portfolio companies tap into such relationships? So we are a part of the Omidyar group. We have a separate entity from Flourish, even though we're all like connected as part of the same group. And that's the relationship, and we're able to leverage the work that the Omidyar network does across sectors, but also Flourish specifically in the work that we've done across Africa to be able to truly support the founders that we work with. As stakeholders in the company, how involved will Madica be in the day-to-day business operations? So we work with founders over this 12 to 18 months period through the structured curriculum that I mentioned earlier, through connection to mentors, through the connections to other experts, other service providers, through the investment readiness work that we'll do with them, and networking with other investors and connections to those investors. That's how involved we intend to be. And the founders that we also work with, we know that this is going to be a significant time commitment on their part as well. And we don't want to take them away from running their business. So we've designed this in such a way that focuses, first of all, on helping you achieve the objectives that you want to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months, right? And we intend to then work with you in a structured way, not taking you off your business, but enough time to be able to balance both. So that's how involved we intend to be, if that answers your question. There's a question on community, specifically who are the fellow founders and the broader Flourish Ventures community. I think I already answered this. How will mentorship work exactly? So we're working with a small pool of mentors, and some of them are on the website right now. Some of them we would keep adding over the next few weeks. But we prioritize mentors who have experienced the growth journeys. So they are not necessarily, some of them would be founders, but either ways, they've worked and seen the process of growing these startups to scale, right? And they come with significant experience, functional experience, whether that's legal, whether that's business development, whether that's tech, whether that's marketing, across different sectors. And we're constantly building that pool. But we're prioritizing mentors who can then, and we're incentivizing them as such as well, who can provide hands-on support beyond just one-off advice, but actually like truly helping founders. It would be structured in the sense that we're working with the mentors to understand their time availability, and we would then be making the connections with the founders in such a way that founders can always book time with them as needed. There's a point that I want to make about mentorship that I don't want to skip my mind now. But we've made this a really small, yeah. Okay, so the point that I was going to make as well is one of the things that we intend to do is to ensure that each founder that comes into this program is assigned a lead mentor, right? And that lead mentor almost then sort of becomes their angel throughout the program, who's helping them navigate the resources that's available, who's always, so to speak, on call, right? I mean, founders will work with other mentors within the program and they will book time as needed, but this mentor then almost becomes their guide through the program, through the resources that are available and all, right? And we think this is important just because, I mean, we all know what an ideal angel investor should look like, right? They are committed, they've invested their own capital in these startups and they want to see them succeed. That's kind of what we're mirroring this around, where it's like, hey, this founder is personally incentivized to see you succeed. So they walk through other mentors, they walk through our team, they walk through all of their own networks as well, right? To help achieve the goals that you set out to achieve at the start of this program. One of the key things that we're doing at the start of the program is to understand what your top 3 priorities are over the next 12 to 18 months, and mentorship will be built around that. And all of the support that we provide will be built around helping you achieve those objectives. Are we able to request mentorship and guidance on specific topics? Yes. Who are the executive coaches that we will have contact with? We're still building parts of the curriculum, and we're still bringing more people in the program. And I mean, as those become finalized, they would become public. What foundational skills will we learn in the highly personalized workshops? Where would this be? Or are they hosted online? So most of the workshops would be virtual, as I mentioned earlier, but there's a physical component that happens every couple of months. And it will be everything from marketing, legal, accounting, like all of the different functional areas of building a business, right? Our goal for founders who go through this program is to learn and, I mean, first of all, focus on their key priorities. But there are other things that we believe founders need to prioritize in the early stage of their business that sets them up for future. An example would be governance, for instance, right? Not too many people prioritize legal and governance in the very early stages, but it always comes to bite them in the future. So how do we think about that in the early stage in such a way that we're then coaching them on, hey, these are the things that you need to keep in mind, and things like that. So it's everything, and I'm just using that one as an example at the very early stages of how do you think about building sustainable businesses long term, and those are what the workshops would focus on. How often would the immersion trips be held, and where? I already answered that. Where we would communicate that as time goes on, but our aim for that is to help founders build the networks that may be missing, that they may not already have. So it would likely be to more advanced ecosystems on the continent, but also globally as well. After we finish the program, what are some of the accelerator programs we'll be introduced to our investors? I mean, I won't be able to answer this question specifically now, but our goal is to be able to make connections to other global investors and other global accelerator programs that would count as a next step for these founders. Perks, you offer many excellent tools and software, but curious to know more about the credit system. For example, for Upwork, does each company get a discounted rate on freelancers hired? So there are different kinds of perks. Some are discounts, some are extended trials, some are, I mean, essentially just like free. So the perks depend on the service provider and what their startup program looks like. But those who get into the program would be able to get a bit more details about this. I hope these questions are, I'm touching on questions that people have asked. I'm very mindful of time. I hope we can wrap this up in less than an hour, but if we need to overshoot by a few more minutes, I just want to make sure that I'm touching on all the questions that people have asked. Flourish as an extensive software innovation portfolio. Will Madica follow in these footsteps, or will it target underserved high technology startups? I'm not sure how to answer this question, but we invest across all sectors in technology startups as well. From what we've seen, So there's a question here about, broadly speaking, why is fundraising all about knowing someone? I mean, in some ways, most VCs like referrals because it's easier to know, to be able to look into their background. And we think that that's one of the challenges, one of the reasons why global investors have not been able to invest in these sectors that we're prioritizing or these geographies that we're prioritizing, because most investors want to know who they're investing in. I think that so two things. One is we've made our application process very democratic and open. We're also doing the work of spending time in these ecosystems to learn more a bit about the context. We're building relationships with stakeholders across the region, because it's one thing to say that we want to invest in represented founders, but it's another thing to be able to find these founders. And a lot of our efforts is going into building relationships across the continent in such a way that, one, you don't necessarily need a referral, because, I mean, part of this info session is to be able to also answer the questions that people might have, right? But yeah, so I'm just saying that to say that, like, it's a challenge that we recognize, and we're trying to do things a bit differently by making this a lot more open to founders. What can we expect to learn from the program? How many mentors already answered this question? Do you offer soft loans or working capital to startups to pay back with interest within the certain time frame? Unfortunately, we do not offer loans or working capital to startups. We do investments directly using safes, as I mentioned. Does the business need to be registered? Do cash paying customers like family, friends, and colleagues count? Can you reapply? So these are three different questions. Does the business need to be registered? At the point of application, not really, right? But eventually, right, for us to be able to do investments, they would need to be registered. Our preference is for startups to be domiciled in Delaware, right? And we would be able to offer some support in redomiciliation as needed, but we're very flexible. We don't have a fixed, or you must register in Delaware, right? But at the point of application, you don't necessarily need to be registered. But for us to be able to make an investment, you would need to. Do cash paying customers like family, friends, and colleagues count? I mean, if your friends, family, and colleagues fit within your target market, I guess so, right? But we would want to see that you're solving a real need for the target market that you've identified. Can you reapply? This is a really good question. Yes, and I know that we've gone through some applications and we've had to decline some applications. You can reapply in the future, and we do encourage you to reapply. Like I mentioned earlier, the application is open on a rolling basis. So if for whatever reason you're not ready yet, you can reapply a couple of months down the line, and that's fine. These are some of the questions that have come in prior to this call. I'm going to run through the Zoom chat now, or Zoom Q&A. I see a lot of questions as well here. How much equity do you take in a startup? I already answered that question as well. It's on a case-by-case basis. On safes, do you use discounts, valuation caps, or both? What valuation caps are typical? What are the criteria? I think the general answer that I would give to this question is that we intend to be very founder friendly. So our terms would be very founder friendly, right? But it would be on a case-by-case basis. How will investment term of the 200K be structured, seeing as some of these startups may be pre-revenue? Will it be standard 200? Okay, I already answered that question. When exactly will the program start? We intend to make our first investments early in Q1 of next year, and then founders join the program afterwards. So our model is invest upfront and then work with founders over a 12 to 18 months period. So as soon as we make the investments, the program kicks off. Do you have a co-working space ecosystem? We are working, so we don't yet know where our first set of portfolio companies would be, but we have a number of relationships and we're currently building more, right? And if there's support that we can provide on that, we will figure out ways to do that. I think is the easiest answer that I can give to this. Madica's investment is up to a $200,000 safe. Is that money in the bank, or do you take a fee for money or resources, fee or money for resources provided? So our cash investments, we're treating that separate from the additional support that we provide, which we don't take any equity for. So the investment, the cash investment is what we take equity for. If a venture does not have a diverse team, but has isolated generous ESOP equity to diversify their team, would they then fall within Madica's investment? This is a good question. We're going to, like, all of our investments are on a case-by-case basis. So I would recommend like sharing as much details as you have in the application, just so that we understand your specific scenario. What we're set up to be able to do is what I've described, and we do prioritize that, but we do evaluate on a case-by-case basis. I should also mention that this does not mean, for instance, that we would not invest in Lagos, Nairobi, Cape Town, Cairo, or that we would not invest in fintech, or that we would not invest in male-only founded teams, or that we won't invest in founders that schooled abroad. Right, we don't expect all of our investments to tick all the 4 boxes, right, that I mentioned. So we're evaluating each investment on a case-by-case basis. They might be stronger in one area than in one area, and so again, case-by-case basis, right? So if you have more information that enables us make a decision, it would be very helpful. Does it mean a startup without a female founder can get funded by Madica? I already answered that question as well. Does Madica have a matching program for startups who would like a female C-suite executive to join? We unfortunately can't do that. We want startups that have already set up their team, already building their products. But like I said, we would still make some investments, but it's weighing all of the different priorities and saying how strong are they on this. All of this is from a thesis standpoint, by the way. We would still evaluate the investments from a commercial standpoint to make sure that this is a scalable business, solving a real need, large enough market, and all of those. Any interest investing in retail tech, e-commerce startups? We invest across sectors. Happy to know you integrated ops in your ecosystem. I'm chairman of Accelerator. How can we collaborate since we're launching our top cohort? There's a form on the website for folks who want to partner with us to fill out. I think it's on the partners page. I'm not sure, but there's definitely a form on the website for you to fill if you want to collaborate. We've applied. What are the next steps? I believe I already answered this question. Is there a deadline for application? No, we take applications on a rolling basis. How long does it take to onboard startups after the first application? Already answered. What about a startup that haven't been on operations for the past year, but have a track record for previous years? Again, it would be on a case-by-case basis. We would want to know, like, what you're building, how you're building, why you haven't operated in the last year, like, does the opportunity still exist, and things like that. Yeah, so I don't have a direct answer to that question. For those who already applied and moved to the second stage, when should they be expecting a feedback? we're currently reviewing stage 2 applications, at least for the first wave of applications that we've gotten, and we will aim to get back to you as soon as possible in January. I would love to say we'll get back to you this December, but probably not, to be honest. So as soon as possible in January. For startups who have applied beginning of this month, when would you get back to them? If we can, we've gotten back to a lot of the stage 1 applications already, but I know that there are a lot who've also applied in the last 1-2 weeks. We would try to get back to you this year. It's likely not going to happen because our office is closed next week, Wednesday. We'll try to do as much as we can before the end of the year, but as soon as we resume work early next year as well. What exactly do the immersion trips look like in terms of learning, capacity building, and networking? I think I already answered this question. Our hope is that they'll be able to build face-to-face connections with both their peers, with mentors, with other experts that we bring in for workshops during that week. But we also intend to do a lot of networking with investors and the broader ecosystem. We think that these trips are going to be helpful in helping them build relationships that they may not yet have. And that's kind of what the structure would look like. What does the application process entail? I already answered this. How long should we wait before applying again? I sent an application for Madica and was rejected, but it says we should apply again after a later date. How long should we wait before applying again? And maybe let me just answer the question about feedback here, because I know a lot of people probably also want feedback on their application. We unfortunately can't provide feedback for stage 1 applications just because we get a lot of applications. And so my recommendation is that, and the reason why we do these info sessions is hopefully you have a lot more insights into what we're looking for now. So if you feel like you're better prepared, or like your startup is in a better position to join the program, you can always reapply at any point. There is no fixed date or fixed duration you have to wait before applying. For those who make it to stage 2, they can request feedback from us if they want, and we'll probably be able to provide at least a 1-line feedback. Again, just to be transparent, what we're trying to do is to balance transparency and openness and democracy, as it were, in the sense of we want this to be an open process, but there's also a limit to how much we can provide feedback to everyone who applies, right? So we've kept the stage 1 form really simple to apply for, so we can provide feedback to that. But stage 2 applications are quite detailed, and if founders want feedback at that stage, we would provide them feedback. It may not be very detailed, but at least they would know if and why we can move forward with them. For founders who we get to actually have calls with, they won't need to ask us for feedback. We would be more than happy to share feedback, because again, there's been a lot more investment in the process and things like that. So that's our way of just kind of balancing it, because we also have to be realistic about the capacity that we have. So I hope you understand that. But how soon should you apply? Again, hopefully these info sessions, and we would hopefully do more of these over time. It's helpful in understanding what we look out for, how we think about this. How many startups per cohort? Good question. We don't run a cohort model, right? So we do plan to bring in startup founders as when they go through like investment committee, essentially. I mean, for the first set of investments that we would make, because we were going through like a long backlog right now, there's every likelihood that we might announce maybe 3 or 4 investments at a time, right? But we would still be able to invest 2 months down the line or 1 month down the line. So we plan to bring in founders at different points in time during the program. I know I mentioned cohort at some points in time on this call. The only reason why I said that is at every point in time, we would likely have maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 teams within the program. And that's what I'm referring to as a cohort, right? So if, because their journeys will overlap, that 12 to 18 months period in the program will overlap. And at every point in time, we'll probably have a handful of startups within the program. That's what we're referring to as a cohort. But we don't run a cohort that says, hey, we bring in 5 founders and they run from January till December, right? Some other startup founders will join in May or in July or at some other points in the month, and their journeys will overlap. I hope that answers that question. But we do intend to invest in 25 to 30 startups over the next 3 years. So very likely we would invest in 10 to a dozen startups next year. Startups that are closing former company and creating new ones. So this call would run till maximum another 30 minutes from now. I know we're almost at the hour. If your question has been answered, feel free to stay on. I'm gonna try to answer as many questions as we can, but we have a hard stop in another 30 minutes. But I think we'll be able to run through the questions before then. Startups that are closing former company and creating new ones for administrative reasons with the same idea team, customers, supply, base and products. I'm not sure what the question is. I'm guessing, would we invest in a startup that's working with the same team and same idea? Maybe they had to close down the last one for legal reasons or whatnot. Again, it would be on a case-by-case basis, right? And we would want to understand what happened. Why not, or why not, and things like that. But we don't have any strict rule against that. I mean, part of our due diligence process would need to be to understand, like, why are you not continuing with that former startup? I already answered the question of when we're starting the program. So someone is saying that they're serving the food industry. Local banks are hesitating to give funding. How will Madica help overcome this challenge? I should mention that there are some limitations with the VC model in general. So we're only able to invest in venture backable solutions as well, companies that have the potential to scale. So, and that means that you're likely leveraging technology in some ways and all. So if you're building a traditional business that's not well suited for VC, this program may also not be the best fit for you, not because you're not building a decent product, but just because there are limitations in what like VCs can invest in, generally speaking, as well. After stage 2 application, how long until a response? I think I already answered this question. Would all applications receive a response at this stage, whether positive or not? Yes, we intend to get back to every founder who's applied at different stages. Startups that was in operation but stopped operations because of lack of capital, can they apply to get capital to restart? Again, case-by-case basis, right? Is the opportunity still there? Is the team still able to work on this? And all of those are questions that we would want to understand. As a VC, do you invest in a software development company with multiple products each with some level of paying customers? At what equity do you get? My recommendation would be to focus on one product. I think it's really hard to do too many things at the early stage. And if you're trying to build multiple products at once, it might be a bit confusing. I mean, we'll take a look and we'll evaluate, but I think it will be really hard to justify like how you intend to balance your time across all of these different products, right? I think it's my honest response to this question. I run a startup, we are offline, but we're making profits, but we are not fully online. We're on social media, but we need assistance to switch online and electronic process. I'm not sure what the question is, but if you're saying you haven't yet built out a product, a technology product, but you have a plan in place to be able to scale. You have a plan in place to be able to use technology in doing so. And there's a large enough market, but you've been able to understand the sector and business and your customers offline. I don't see any problem with that. Is there a debt finance option available in some cases here? No, there is no debt finance option. Emmanuel, could you be more specific on the equity side? Could you give an estimation? For instance, a startup doing $15 MRR, how much, depending on the amount you want to put in, how much could there be estimate equity? I'm not sure I understand the question, but the beauty of SAFES is that it essentially pushes a lot of these negotiations until your further next round, right? I know there was a question about like discounts and caps earlier on, but yeah, all of that equity conversations would eventually then be determined like over time, right? What is the ETA for a response from application submission? I already answered that. Is there a specific mentorship available based on the industry we're in? That's a good question. We prioritizing balance of functional areas, but we're also balancing a mix of sectors. And regardless, we also have a pool of, and we're building a pool of experts across sectors that will definitely be able to connect you to. So yes, there would be mentorship and support based on your specific industry. I already answered the question of equity. We applied for Madica a few weeks ago. We found it difficult to upload our pitch deck. That part of the form seemed disabled. How do we monitor the status of application? We get back to every founder who's applied. On uploading your pitch deck, if you do run into any issues, which you shouldn't have, first of all, what I would recommend is, I know when you click on the upload button, it opens a new dialog box that may not be visible on the screen. You may just need to scroll up and down on your page to find that dialog box, but it's there. But if you run into any issues, please send an email to hello@madica.vc and we would look into that. My startup matches Madica's investment criteria and would greatly benefit from Madica's ecosystem and mentorship, but we're also actively looking to raise a larger pre-seed round. Now for 18 months run, we are working capital to really focus on building. Will Madica still be a fit? I would say apply. I'm personally generally anxious about startups that are raising $1 million, for instance, or I mean, I've seen pitch decks that are raising $1.5 million or like $1 million. If you have like the funding, the additional funding committed, there may be a case to be made. Or if you have a plan to raise that already, like there may be a case there, right? But I'm also a bit nervous about startups that may then be too advanced. Ideally, even though this program is largely personalized, there are parts of the program that would cut across, right? And there's also the work that we need to do in ensuring that like startups are not too far apart. So I'll be nervous about this from that standpoint. But if there is a clear plan for how maybe you already have funding committed or a clear plan for how you intend to raise the additional funding, then maybe, right. But this will be on a case-by-case basis. And there will have to be some other like really strong points in your application that make this a compelling case. But otherwise, I mean, if the amount you're raising is still maybe within the 500K range, well, we're still more flexible on that. But if it's significantly more than that, I personally get like very nervous. So I hope that answers your question. For those who engage earlier part of the backlog, any specific timelines to hear back from the team. I think I already answered that question. Equity, I hope I've answered all the questions on equity. What if the founding team is male only? Would the company be overlooked? Again, on a case-by-case basis, we're balancing. We don't expect all the investments that we made to tick all the boxes that we are evaluating from, right? But honestly speaking, it would be really hard, and it's unlikely, for instance, that we invest, just as an example, in a male-only team that's cool, that's Stanford, that are building a fintech solution and that are based in Lagos. I'm just using that to give you an example, right? Because that, in a sense, like, is everything that we are trying to mitigate against. But like, if they're a male-only team, but they're building a sector that we find very interesting, or they are in a geography that's interesting, we will definitely take a look at them. So we don't expect every investment to tick all the boxes, but we're evaluating on a case-by-case basis. How does Madica do company evaluations? Do we need to incorporate our startups elsewhere to facilitate investment procedures? We generally prefer startups that are domiciled in Delaware, but again, we would support them through that domiciliation process if needed. Do you invest in companies founded and operating in Ethiopia? Yes, by all means. Do you know what type of accelerator programs that will be introduced to? Again, not necessarily accelerator programs. The goal is to understand what your growth needs are over the next 18 months and like what growth looks like afterwards. And it would be an ongoing conversation of what makes the most sense, what investors are the right fit. And our goal is to then like make introductions to those kinds of investors. Our earlier investments done, is this after the 12 to 18 months program? It's upfront so that you have enough runway. We don't want startups raising funds during the program, right? We want you focused on building. So we invest upfront. Ideally, you're able to close. If, for instance, you're raising more than 200K, we would then want you to close your round before joining the program, right? But we invest upfront, and then we expect you to focus on building over the next 12 to 18 months before your next round. When are you announcing your first cohort of startups? We're aiming for early in Q1 next year. That would likely be late January, early February, most likely early February. When is the application deadline? There is no deadline. Is it possible to look back at any stage one startup that didn't make it to stage two? No, but you can always reapply. If accepted to the program, at what stage do you provide funding, and is it in phases? We provide funding upfront. Are funds given in tranches, or is it paid once as a lump sum? We intend to pay or invest upfront. If there is a reason why, maybe during the due diligence process, there's a reason why we're convinced that we need to do this in tranches, we would. But again, that would be on a case-by-case basis. Would there be instances where mentors will be already investing in competing company? How do you control that? That's a really good question. Every mentor that we bring into the program, they declare, like, we go through like, hey, what kinds of investment, especially if for investments that are already within the Flourish portfolio. So they declare, for instance, if they already have existing relationships. We introduce, part of our process is also introducing potential investments to our mentors early on before we make the investment. And we expect them to declare any conflict of interest before we make the investment, right? And if it's an investment that we're going to make, then if there are any conflict of interest, we know how to then like manage that with the mentors. So definitely, if there is a conflict of interest, that mentor won't be able to serve as a lead mentor for the startup, right? And But we also are aware, and we would then understand like how to manage the relationship going forward. Would there be instance where the mentor is already investing? Yeah. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Where do the physical sessions take place? We'll determine that over time. But like I said, it will likely be in more advanced ecosystems on the continent or outside the continent. I already filled up the application form on VC4A platform. Do I need to fill it up again? All of our applications go through the apply page on the website. So it's www.madica.vc/apply. If that's where you fill the form, then you don't need to reapply again. That's the only application we recognize. I know there is an application, if that's what you're referring to, there's a link on VC4A that links back to the website. If that's the form that you fill, then that's fine. But any other application other than that, we do not recognize. Is there a way to shadow startups who didn't make it to stage 2 for you to reach out to them? Honestly, the only way right now is for them to reapply. And I hope that answers your question. Is it a virtual or in-person program? It's largely virtual with in-person components. What is the mark check size? Up to 200K, I mentioned. Can bounce, that's one way to put it. Startups send periodic updates to you for you to monitor their progress. I wouldn't recommend, but I mean, we have a public email address, hello@madica.vc. If you feel the need to send updates at every point in time, please do so. But it doesn't significantly change the status of things. You would still need to reapply at some point in the future. But yes, if you do want to stay in touch and send updates, by all means, please do. How can we apply? www.madica.vc/apply. How do I know I did not get in? We get back to everyone who's applied. Can we have access to the recording? Yes, the reason why we're recording this is it will be published on the website at some point soon. How many months down the line can startups reply? I already answered the question. How do you check for founder market fits when the founders are first-time founders? I think this is a really good question. I think there should be some evidence that you understand the space, whether it's through, and in some ways, the fact that you have paying customers is a proxy for that, right? But I think beyond that, if it's a sector that, I mean, your background as well in the industry matters as well. So maybe this is a space that you studied, or maybe you have some work experience in that sector, right? But if none of that exists, right, I mean, it would also be important to know what kinds of advisors or board members you've been able to bring on board, for instance. If there's nothing that shows us that you understand this space or you built a team around like expertise that you may not have, I mean, that's definitely a flag for us. I hope that answers your question, but we definitely do encourage first-time founders, but there has to be some evidence that you understand the space, or that you build competencies around you, whether through the team, advisors that show us that, you know what, competencies that you might be lacking, you've been able to make up for that. You're sector agnostic, but are there any sectors that you stay away from? Really good question. We need to think a bit more about this, but obviously, like, yeah, I don't have an immediate answer to this question. We can think a bit more about this and put up in the FAQ. So by the way, all of these questions are really helpful because we're also going to be documenting the FAQs, answers to FAQs on the website. So this will probably be among some of the questions that we answer. Would immersion trips be fully funded, or would the startups need to pay for their travel expenses? We intend to, fingers crossed, fund. There are certain things that would be able to fund, right? But if, for instance, you want to bring additional co-founders, or you want to stay for extra days and things like that, then you will need to fund that, right? But there are certain things that we would be able to fund, fingers crossed. Again, we're finalizing the details of this, but we do intend, again, the goal of this is to help make up for things that may be missing. So we intend to carry some of that burden for sure. In addition to mentors, founders have access to an in-house Madica value creation team that will support founders with business operations advisory, i.e. if a founder needs growth and expansion strategy support. I don't imagine a mentor will have time for anything beyond high-level advisory. Is there a value creation team to help with nitty-gritty or growth strategy operations conundrums? So first of all, we are prioritizing mentors who can go beyond the high level, right? We also are building a network of experts that would be able to provide additional support. But to your question about an advisory team, we are also working and building relationships with certain service providers. We're still finalizing what the details look like. I mean, on certain things, we would not be able to pay for, like, we wouldn't be able to pay for like legal costs, for instance, or like accounting costs, just for legal reasons, right? But if there are certain services that we can bring in a consultant for, that that would be valuable to everyone within the court, we're exploring ways that we can do that in addition to mentorship. And I believe that's a question that you're answering. We're limited in what we can do in that regard, especially when it comes to professional services, like I mentioned. But if it's things like marketing, or if it's things like design or operations, as you mentioned, then we're exploring ways that we can bring in additional consultants to support the entire portfolio in doing that. Can you quickly tell me how to apply? I already mentioned that. Is it virtual or in person? Already answered. Can Madica's investments be used as leverage for momentum to go and raise bigger rounds from other VCs? If it's your follow-on round, by all means, because the aim of this program is to create an ecosystem and a brand that's strong enough that any investor globally can, once they know you've gone through this program, like, it drops any perception of risk that they have of like African startups in that sense. So that's what we intend to do. So by all means, like, leverage the Madica brand. But if the question that you're asking is upfront, right, we make a commitment to invest and then you go use that to raise a round. Two things that I would say: if you are able to show us how you can complete this round before joining this program, that's not an issue, right? But we don't expect you to be raising funds like 6 months into the program, right? We want startups that can commit to that 12 to 18 months period, and then looking to raise funding at the end of that. And part of this is supporting them in doing that. So I hope that answers your question. If I made my first stage application on 27 November, does it mean I'm not expecting feedback? We would get back to everyone who's applied. We're just working through a backlog. Would this recording be shared with us? It would be published on the website. Thank you. What's your PR policy on selected founders? Is it about vanity metrics and social buzz, or do you help their products do the talking? I hope you can also tell that the reason why we're prioritizing paying customers is not just because, like, it's not about the buzz, actually, right? We want founders who are building sustainable businesses, and the core part of the program is helping them align their businesses in a way that they can build long-term sustainable businesses. I mean, PR is great and the buzz is great, but we are looking for founders who would build truly sustainable businesses, and that's what this is about. But I mean, PR is needed as well, and you can't really just expect your product alone to do the talking, even though your product should do the talking, right? But PR is helpful, and like, let's not take that for granted. For those who get to stage 2, are you going to reach out to them? Yes, we would. Does the team at Madica have female representation within, and what's the role of diversity for the fund itself? This is a really good question. So Madica as a team right now, like, I'm the only full-time Madica employee right now. And with that said, we're actually recruiting for 2 roles right now. One is the head of portfolio support, and the other is the head of community and communications. And we do want like females to join the team, right? And we actually are prioritizing like female applications. So yes, representation and diversity is important to us as a fund itself and as a team. And we're taking that into how we're building our team as well. And I'm just putting that as a plug out there. Even though we are at an advanced stage now in the recruiting process, but if you know anyone who's a good fit, the JDs are, I believe, on the website. So please recommend anyone you think would be a great fit. Would you be willing to work with studios that build viable ideas to MVPs? Yeah, I mean, we do want founders to apply directly, but we don't have an issue if they've gone through like a venture studio in the past, and like they have a venture studio as a co-founder, as it were, on their cap table. But the founders themselves need to apply directly. What happens? I think I'm almost like last 3 questions, and we're almost at time, so that's good. What happens if startups that are accepted choose not to participate in the curriculum aspect and trips? Where is the line of freedom and expectation from Madica? Really good question. So one of the questions that we ask at stage 2 is to understand if they would be willing to commit to the program. And we expect everyone who we invest in to commit to this program. So if you're not willing to commit to this program, then the program is probably not the best fit for you, right? But with that said, in designing this program, we are very mindful that, I mean, you are building your startup, right? And that's what we want you to do. So this isn't a program where it's like, hey, all of your time is invested into the program and you don't have time for anything else. Like, the program is to enable you do the things that you say you want to do over the next 18 months. And if you're not willing to commit to that, maybe the program isn't the best fit for you. Yeah. In terms of time expectation, I need to clarify that I believe the expectation is up to 20 hours a month. I need to confirm that very specifically, and we'll put out more details on this early next year. So it's about 5 hours a week, so to speak, a big part of which is the time you spend with mentors, right, which you essentially take the lead on. So we expect mentorship to be driven by the startup founders themselves in terms of driving the agenda and what they want to expect from the engagements. But the workshops, for instance, that we intend to have are probably going to be like once every 2 weeks. We meet together for 2 hours or something, spend an hour, 90 minutes thereabouts on peer mentorship, and another 1 hour on like workshops. So it's not like too significant from a structure standpoint. The rest of it is really like personalized and driven by the founders themselves. So it's not like some rigid program that you have to spend all your day doing. We want you to spend time building the program. But if this commitment is one that you are not willing to make, then maybe the program isn't the best fit for you. We actually need above 200K, and we're currently raising from other VCs. Hope it won't affect the application. I believe I already answered this question as well. If it's not too significant and you are able to show that, hey, you have a plan for raising this, we typically don't look at that in the first stage, to be honest, except maybe you're raising like significantly more than 500K, for instance, and your growth stage is clearly above the range that we're looking at for this program. But if it's say within 500K, less than 1 million, and there's a plan for how you intend to raise this fund, not too much of a big deal. So say you fail to raise a fund of 1 million, can one reapply to Madica's program for 150 to 200K, assuming that can be used for the next 18 months? I think the question that I would want to then ask is, why were you raising 1 million in the first place? Right. Ideally, you were trying to raise 1 million because that's what you needed for your traction for the next roughly 18 months. So what has changed? I mean, we need to understand that. These are all the questions that have come in, and I'm really glad that we're able to walk through all of this. Thank you so much for everyone that have stayed up till now. I hope this has answered any questions that you have. If you do have any additional questions, please feel free to email hello@madica.vc. We won't be able to respond to the questions one-on-one, but we'll include them as we then draft FAQs for the website. We would also post this recording on the website soon. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and good luck with your applications.